Hello, and welcome back to the deep dive. Usually we are sprinting. We're tearing through, tech trends or geopolitical shifts or the latest productivity hacks, just trying to get you the bottom line before your commute is over. But today requires a different gear.
It really does.
Yeah, we're slowing down, we're turning off the noise. We are taking a stack of notes and a very significant, thoughtful essay by Brother Woody Brahm titled The Attributes of God, Understanding Who He Is and Who We Are, and we're going to just walk through it step by step.
And I'm really glad we're slowing down because you can't really sprint through this topic.
No, definitely not.
We're talking about the character of God here. This isn't something you can just kind of bullet point and put on a slide deck.
Exactly. It's the subject that kind of encompasses all other subjects. If you get this wrong, you get everything else slightly off center. But if you get this right, or at least if you begin to see it clearly, it changes the way you wake up in the morning. So the tone today is pastoral. It's reflective. We are inviting you, the listener, into a quiet room to ask the biggest question there is. What is God actually like?
It's the ultimate question, isn't it? But I have to be honest right at the start. For a lot of people, maybe even for me on certain days, this topic can feel distant. Or maybe abstract is the right word.
Abstract, yeah.
Because we live in a world of deadlines and bills and relationship drama. Talking about divine attributes can feel like we're entering a philosophy lecture that just doesn't touch the ground. How do we bridge that gap? I mean, how do we know we aren't just projecting our own wishes onto the ceiling and calling it God?
That is the fear, isn't it? That religion is just humanity shouting into a void and hearing our own echo. And frankly, if we were left to our own devices, that is exactly what would happen.
We just invent something comfortable.
Yeah. Right. We'd invent a God who looks like us, probably a bit more powerful, a bit more successful, but essentially human. Or on the flip side, we'd invent a God of pure terror to explain the storms and the plagues. But the premise of Brother Brum's essay, and really the whole premise of the Christian faith, is that we are not left to guess. We aren't building a chart based on our best philosophical speculations.
So we aren't starting with, I think God should be like this or that.
Exactly. We are starting with the fact that God has spoken. The essay makes this discussion very early on. We are listening. We're listening to how God has revealed himself. And when we actually open the text and listen, we don't find a projection of ourselves at all. We find a paradox that no human mind would have ever invented.
What kind of paradox? Break that down.
Well, we find a being who is utterly transcendent, far above us, unmade, existing in a way we can't even compute, and yet simultaneously, shockingly near. He is the God of the galaxies and the God of the microscopic details of your Tuesday morning.
I want to pause on that because we hear words like transcendent and immanent in theology classes all the time. But let's look at the source material. When you say far above, what does the essay actually point to?
It points directly to Psalm 90, verse 2. Let me read it, because the wording really matters here. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God.
From everlasting to everlasting.
Just think about the weight of that phrase. We are creatures of time. Everything we know has a start date and an expiration date.
Our phones, our bodies, nations.
Even the stars themselves will eventually burn out. But God is outside of that sequence. He isn't just really, really old. He is eternal. He is the uncaused cause. That is the far above part. It establishes a distance between creator and creature that can never be crossed by human effort.
Which, if we're honest, sounds terrifyingly cold. If he is that big, that removed from our timeline, why would he care about my mortgage payment or my health test results?
And that is exactly where the paradox comes in. Look at Matthew 10, verses 29 through 31. The exact same text that declares his eternity also records Jesus saying, "Are not two sparrows, yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care?" And then he gets intensely personal. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered.
That's a level of intimacy that's it's almost uncomfortable. Numbering hairs. That implies an attention to detail that borders on obsessive.
It implies that his greatness doesn't mean he is too big for small things. It means he is big enough to handle the small things perfectly. Think about it. A CEO ignores the janitor because the CEO has limited bandwidth. They have to prioritize. God has infinite bandwidth. He doesn't have to triage his attention. And knowing this, holding these two massive truths together provides what Brother Brom calls ballast in the storms of life.
Ballast. That's the heavy weight they put in the bottom of a ship to keep it from flipping over in rough water.
Exactly. If you only have the God is near part, you basically have a buddy. A buddy who sympathizes with you but might be too weak to actually help stop the storm.
Right.
But if you only have the God is far above part, you have a distant tyrant who has the power but just doesn't care. When you have both infinite power and infinite care, you have a ship that can sail through an absolute hurricane.
Okay, I can really see the practical value of that. But the essay moves from this general idea of the paradox into some very specific categories. It talks about communicable and incommunicable attributes. Now, those are $5 seminary words. We really need to unpack them because I suspect a lot of our listeners, and frankly, a lot of lifelong believers, mix these up.
They absolutely do, and mixing them up is the source of a whole lot of human misery. Let's start with the incommunicable ones. These are the attributes that belong to God alone. They are features of his divine nature that he does not share with creatures. They are the boundary line between the creator and the created.
Give me the list from the essay.
We've touched on a few already. Aseity is a big one, meaning he is entirely self-existent. Yeah, from the Latin esse, meaning from himself. He doesn't need battery power. He doesn't need food or sleep or counseling or air. Then there's eternity. He has no beginning and no end. Immutability, he doesn't change. Malachi 3 verse 6 says, I, the Lord, do not change. Omnipotence, unlimited power. And omniscience, unlimited knowledge.
Okay, so those are his alone and communicable.
These are the traits he actually shares with us because we are made in his image. We are designed to be like mirrors reflecting these specific aspects of his character into the world. Things like moral beauty, love, truthfulness, wisdom, mercy. 1 John 4 verse 8 says God is love, and then we are commanded to love one another. We can't be infinite love, but we can be real love.
So here's where the misery comes in, right? We
Right.
constantly try to switch the lists.
Precisely. This is really the root of the original sin. We try to grab the incommunicable attributes for ourselves.
We want to be sovereign.
Yes. We want to control every single outcome in our lives. We want to be omniscient, so we doom scroll the news at 2 in the morning because we think if we just know everything, we'll somehow be safe. But we are finite creatures. We aren't built for that kind of voltage. So what happens? We burn out. We get completely paralyzed by anxiety. We crumble.
Because we're trying to carry the weight of the world, which is exclusively God's job, instead of just reflecting love and truth, which is our actual job.
That is, exactly. The essay points out that the goal of knowing this theological distinction is to simply let God be God so we can finally just be human. It frees you. You don't have to save the world. You just have to be faithful in your specific corner of it.
That is huge relief, honestly. But let's ground this in history, because one of the things I really appreciate about this source material is that it emphasizes that Israel didn't figure this out in the classroom. They didn't sit around debating metaphysics. They figured it out in the mud and blood of actual historical events.
Yes. God didn't drop a theology textbook from the sky. He stepped forward into human events.
Start with Abram. We always start there in these discussions, but let's really look at it. The essay mentions the call of Abram in Genesis 12. Why is this specific moment the starting point for understanding God's character?
You really have to picture the cultural context of Ur of the Chaldees. This was a fiercely polytheistic world. There was a god for the moon, a god for the river, a god for the harvest. And these gods were fickle. They were territorial and largely indifferent to human suffering unless they were adequately bribed with sacrifices. Into that chaotic noise, one voice speaks to one single man. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you.
It's a ridiculous ask, really. Leave your safety net, leave your entire inheritance, and follow a voice you've literally never heard before to an undisclosed location.
It is entirely radical. But in doing that, God was revealing something massive about his nature. He is a personal God who initiates relationship. He isn't a blind force of nature like gravity. He speaks, and he makes promises. I will make you into a great nation, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. This immediately reveals his faithfulness. He binds himself to a human timeline and a specific people. He's essentially saying, watch me, watch what I do with this family over the next 2,000 years, and you will know exactly who I am.
So human history becomes the laboratory where his character is proven over time.
Exactly. And the most dramatic, undeniable experiment in that lab was the Exodus. This is where we did the name with a capital N.
Exodus 3, the burning bush.
Right. Moses is standing there, barefoot on holy ground, absolutely terrified. He is about to be sent back to the reigning superpower of the day, Egypt, to demand the immediate release of their entire slave labor force. And he asks a very logical, practical question. Who do I say sent me? The Egyptians have 100 different gods. Who are you?
And the answer comes back, I am WHO.
I am Yahweh. It's a verb and a noun wrapped together. It means the self-existent one. It means I am the one who is. Now compare that statement to the gods of Egypt. The Nile god, Hapi, depended on the rainy seasons. Ra, the sun god, had a daily cycle he was bound to. They were all part of nature. Yahweh is stepping in and saying, I am not part of the system. I created the system. I depend on absolutely nothing.
It's a declaration of absolute independence from creation.
Yeah.
But then, as the essay points out so beautifully, he doesn't just stay in that abstract IMM space. He gets these compound names throughout Israel's history, names born from actual encounters: El Roi, Jehovah Rapha.
Yes, and I love these because they are born out of deep trauma. Take El Roi, the God who sees. This didn't come from a theologian or a king in a palace. It came from Hagar, a slave woman, pregnant, abused, running away into the brutal desert to die. She thought she was completely invisible, abandoned by the entire world. And God meets her right there in the sand. And she says, I have now seen the one who sees me.
That is so powerful. It anchors the omniscience of God, the fact that he theoretically sees everything into the gritty reality of human pain. It's not just that he casually observes the stars, he sees the single mom crying in the wilderness.
Or take Jehovah Rapha, the Lord who heals. That one comes in Exodus 15, right after they cross the Red Sea. They've experienced this massive rescue, but now they are wandering and they're desperately thirsty. They finally find water at Marah, but it's bitter, it's toxic, they can't drink it. The people grumble, they panic, which is completely understandable. And God shows Moses a piece of wood to throw into the water, and the water becomes sweet. And right there, he tells them, I am the Lord who heals you. He is teaching them a new aspect of his character. He's saying, I am not just the God of the big cinematic rescue from slavery. I am the God of your daily provision. I can actually fix what is broken in your path.
So these specific names aren't just titles they memorize for a quiz. They are memorials. They are cultural reminders of specific moments when God showed up.
Exactly. They are the resume of God, written directly into the lives of his people.
But that resume isn't finished at the end of the Old Testament. The essay shifts gears to the New Testament and says, the light grows brighter.
It becomes blindingly bright. Hebrews 1, verses 1 through 3 is the foundational text here. It says, in the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. And then it describes Jesus with this incredible phrase, the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being.
Exact representation.
In the original language, it's the Greek word character. It literally refers to the impression a heavy stamp makes on hot wax. It is an identical copy. If you want to know what the invisible, transcendent God is actually like, you just look at the visible Jesus.
That really simplifies things, doesn't it? Because let's face it, the Old Testament can be very hard to interpret sometimes. You see sweeping judgments, you see wars, you see complex laws. But if Jesus is the exact representation,
then you just look at Jesus to settle the debate. Does God care about the sick? Look at Jesus reaching out and touching the leper when no one else would. Does God hate religious hypocrisy? Look at Jesus flipping the tables in the temple courts. Does God actually want to forgive terrible sinners? Look at Jesus hanging on the cross, bleeding, saying, Father, forgive them. Jesus is the exegesis of God. He explains the Father's heart to us perfectly.
And yet, as the essay is careful to remind us, this doesn't mean we just throw out the Old Testament or the ongoing story of Israel. It explicitly says the distinction between Israel and the church remains part of the grand story.
Right. Romans 11 is very clear that God's gifts and his calling are irrevocable. He doesn't break his ancient promises to Abraham or David just to start a shiny new franchise. The story of Jesus is the fulfillment of those ancient promises, not the cancellation of them. It shows his perfect faithfulness once again. He always finishes what he starts.
Let's walk through that overarching narrative arc then. The essay suggests we trace the character of God sequentially, from Genesis to Revelation. We've touched on pieces, but let's really look at the flow. It starts obviously with creation.
In the beginning, God. Before there was matter or energy or a timeline, there was God. And he speaks all of creation into existence. Now, this obviously shows his raw power, yes, but look at what he actually makes. He makes a garden. He makes a world teeming with life and vibrant color and taste and sound. And he calls it good. This shows his deep benevolence. He isn't a miserly creator making a gray utilitarian box. He is a profoundly generous artist.
And he shares the stage. He makes humanity.
He creates us in his very image. He gives us real agency. He gives us a job to cultivate the earth. That imparts an incredible dignity to human life. But then comes the fall.
And this is where the character of God faces its first real test, so to speak, in the eyes of the reader. Humanity actively rebels. We decide we know better than the artist. We break the one protective rule given to us. Now, a justice-only God, a God with no communicable mercy, would have just ended the simulation right there. Delete. Reboot.
He would have been completely within his holy rights to do so.
Yeah.
But look at Genesis 3, verse 15. In the exact moment he is pronouncing the necessary judgment on the serpent, he makes a promise. He promises that the offspring of the woman will one day crush the serpent's head. He promises a redeemer. This is the proto-evangelium, the first hint of grace. He doesn't ignore the sin. There are severe consequences. They are cast out of the garden. But he does not abandon the sinner. He sets a massive, long-term rescue plan in motion.
And that rescue plan takes us through the patriarchs, into the dark years in Egypt, and straight to the Exodus. The essay specifically calls this section the dual revelation of mercy and might.
We really have to feel the crushing weight of the silence first to understand that. The Israelites were in brutal slavery for 400 years. Multiple generations lived, suffered, and died, seeing absolutely nothing but the taskmaster's whip. It felt to them like God was completely gone. But Exodus 2 says, God heard their groaning and he remembered his covenant.
Now, remembered in that context doesn't mean he had forgotten and suddenly slapped his forehead, right?
No, in the biblical text, remember is an action verb. It means he is now stepping in to act on a previous commitment, and when he finally acts, he acts with terrifying might. The 10 plagues, the parting of the sea.
Why the intense violence, though? The plagues are utterly brutal. Modern readers struggle with that.
Because it wasn't just a political negotiation, it was a war. It was a divine war against the demonic gods of Egypt who were holding his people captive. Mercy to the violently oppressed very often looks like severe judgment to the oppressor. You can't just ask a tyrant like Pharaoh nicely to let his free labor walk away. God had to completely break the economic and military power of the empire to free his children. Psalm 136 actually recounts the violent overthrow of Pharaoh and follows it immediately with the refrain, "His love endures forever." His love in that moment is a warrior's love protecting his family.
Then they cross the sea, they get to Mount Sinai, and the atmosphere shifts radically. It goes from warrior to judge.
It goes to holiness. The mountain is smoking. There is deafening thunder. The people are terrified to even touch the base of the mountain, and God gives the law. Now, modern people tend to really chafe at the idea of the law. It feels restrictive, like a straitjacket. But the essay beautifully describes God's holiness and his law as a blazing goodness that orders life as it ought to be.
Life as it ought to be. That is a very different spin than we usually hear.
Think deeply about it. Do not murder. Do not steal. Do not commit adultery. Is that God just being a cosmic killjoy? No. That is God saying, here is the blueprint for how you build a society that doesn't eat itself alive. The law is just a direct reflection of his own internal character. He is perfectly truthful, so he tells us, don't lie. He is perfectly faithful, so he says, don't commit adultery.
But here's the central tension that the entire Old Testament leaves us wrestling with. Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7. We mentioned it briefly earlier, but we need to really dwell on it now. God is describing himself to Moses.
He says, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness.
Which is beautiful. Sign me up for that, God.
Maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin, yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished.
And there's the screeching halt. Stop the car. How can he forgive wickedness and yet not clear the guilty? That sounds like a complete logical contradiction. If you forgive me, you clear me. If you punish me, you don't forgive me. You mathematically cannot do both.
That is the ultimate cliffhanger of the Old Testament. How can a perfectly just God forgive wicked people without becoming unjust himself? Think about a human courtroom. If a human judge lets a confessed murderer go free just because the judge is feeling loving that day, we don't call that judge good, we call him deeply corrupt. So how can God be completely just and yet be the justifier of the wicked?
The narrative moves to the monarchy of the prophets and the exile, and it seems like this massive question just hangs in the air unresolved. God is incredibly patient. He waits centuries while Israel cycles through rebellion, but eventually the hammer of judgment falls. Jerusalem is burned, the temple is destroyed, the people are dragged into exile.
And yet, even in the darkness of the exile, we see his steadfast faithfulness. He had promised David a throne forever back in 2 Samuel 7. Now the physical throne is gone. The temple is just rubble. Has God failed? No. The prophets insist that this is severe discipline, not a death sentence. He eventually brings a remnant back home. But the core tension remains completely unresolved. The blood of bulls and goats on an altar can't really take away human moral guilt. It's just a temporary placeholder, a covering.
Which leads us directly to the great solution. The incarnation. The cross.
This is where we have to use a heavy theological term that the essay points us to: propitiation.
Break that down for the listener.
It's found in Romans 3, verse 25. It's very different from just casually wiping away a mistake. Propitiation means satisfying wrath. On the cross of Christ, the massive tension of Exodus 34 is finally resolved. The guilty are punished, all the holy wrath, all the strict justice that human sin deserves is poured out completely. But it is poured out on Christ, the willing substitute.
So the demands of justice are fully satisfied. He didn't just wink at the sin and sweep it under the cosmic rug.
Exactly. The terrible debt was paid in full. And because it was paid, God can now be entirely compassionate and gracious to us without compromising 1 ounce of his justice. Holy love and holy wrath meet at the cross, and neither one is diminished.
That is what Paul calls the wisdom of God. It's a staggering solution no human philosophy would have ever come up with, and the resurrection is the historical proof that the check actually cleared.
Yes, it proves that death and sin couldn't hold him. It absolutely anchors our hope. Now, the narrative isn't over, of course. We are living in the spanning chapters between the resurrection and the second return, but we know exactly how the story ends. It bends toward a renewed physical kingdom where Christ reigns on David's throne and the earth is full of the knowledge of the Lord, just as the waters cover the sea.
So we've seen the sweeping story. Now, I want to take the time to really dig back into the specific attributes again in light of that story. The essay calls this section theological significance, but let's just call it, what kind of God are we dealing with every day? We rushed through the ominous earlier. Let's take them one by one, very slowly. Immutability. The fact that God does not change.
Think about the alternative for a second. We live in a world of constant flux. Your body is aging every minute. The global economy is constantly fluctuating. Political alliances shift overnight. Even your own internal mood, how you feel about your own life, changes drastically from 8 in the morning to 8 at night. If God were like that, if you were evolving or moody, the universe would be a terrifying place. You'd never know if the God who loved you yesterday is just in a bad mood today.
Some modern theologians have actually suggested that God does change, that he learns as he goes along with us. It's called open theism.
And the essay strongly warns against that idea. Think about the logic. If God is learning new things, he isn't perfect in his knowledge. If he changes, is he changing for the better? Well, then he wasn't perfect before. Is he changing for the worse? Then he isn't perfect now. The orthodox biblical view that God is the exact same yesterday, today, and forever is the only thing that gives us a firm song, as Brother Brome puts it. It means the exact promises he made to Abraham 4,000 years ago are just as solid for you today. He is the rock.
What about omniscience? All-knowing. I have to admit, and I think a lot of listeners will agree, this one cuts both ways. It is very comforting that he knows my needs before I ask, but it is deeply unsettling that he knows my hidden thoughts. The dark ones. The petty ones I don't even tell my spouse.
That is the deep terror of being fully known. We spend so much relational energy curating our image. We desperately want people to see the filtered Instagram version of our character. We have this deep-seated fear that if people really knew us, the jealousy, the selfishness, the lust, they would immediately reject us.
Right, it's that feeling of, if you truly knew me, you wouldn't love me.
But here's the profound gospel hidden inside this attribute. God knows it all. He sees the thoughts you are too ashamed to even articulate to yourself. He knows the absolute worst thing about you. And knowing all of that exhaustively, he still deliberately went to the cross for you. He loves you with his eyes completely wide open. He isn't ever going to be disillusioned by you because he never had any illusions about you to begin with.
Wow. That completely turns the terror into something else. It turns it into radical acceptance.
It does. And practically, it also means surprise never overtakes him. Isaiah 46, verse 10 says, he knows the end from the beginning. Nothing that happens in the evening news, nothing that happens in your doctor's office ever catches God off guard. He doesn't ever have to scramble in heaven to come up with a plan B for your life.
Next is omnipotence. All-powerful.
Again, we have to define this carefully so we don't fall into absurdity. Doesn't mean God can do the logically impossible. He can't make a square circle, and the Bible explicitly says he cannot lie. It means his holy purposes cannot ever be thwarted by outside forces. Jeremiah 32, verse 17 says, sovereign Lord, nothing is too hard for you.
But here is the immediate pushback from the skeptic and from the suffering believer.
Yeah.
If he is truly all-powerful, why is there so much suffering? Why doesn't he stop the war? Why doesn't he just cure the cancer right now?
Yeah.
This is the classic problem of pain.
It is the hardest question we face. And the essay doesn't offer a glib bumper sticker answer, but it points us back to the combination of his attributes. We must hold his power tightly together with his infinite wisdom and his perfect goodness. If he has the raw power to stop a tragedy, and he doesn't, it must be because his infinite wisdom sees a necessary reason to allow it that our finite minds simply cannot yet access.
That is a very hard pill to swallow when you're weeping in the middle of a hospital waiting room.
It is excruciatingly hard, but look at the alternative. The alternative is that the cancer is just a random, meaningless accident, and God is sitting up there wringing his hands, wishing he could help you, but lacking the power to do so. A weak God offers absolutely no hope. A sovereign God offers the fierce hope that even this senseless-looking pain is being purposefully woven into a massive tapestry that ends in your redemption. Romans 8, verse 28, that he works all things for good only functions if God is actually sovereign over all things.
That's true. If he's not in control of the threads, he can't promise to weave them into anything good. Finally, let's look at omnipresence.
We go back to Psalm 139 for this. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. Now, this isn't pantheism. God isn't physically in the tree or the dirt like a mystical force. He is completely distinct from his creation. But he is fully, personally present to every single point in creation at all times. It means you are never, ever alone. You can be locked in a solitary prison cell, you can be in a sterile hospital ICU, or thousands of feet underwater in a submarine, and the absolute fullness of God is right there with you.
Okay, so those are the massive, big God attributes. Let's pivot now to the moral beauty of grounder. The communicable ones we are meant to reflect. Holiness, love, justice, mercy. The essay says these specific traits form the backbone of worship.
Just think about how our theology shapes our actual humanity. We always become like whatever we worship. If you worship a God of raw power like money or career success or political influence, you inevitably become hard. You start trampling over people to get what you want. But if you truly worship the God of the Bible,
If you worship a perfectly holy God,
you start to deeply value purity. You begin to realize that sin isn't just breaking some arbitrary celestial rules. It's a toxic pollution. It wounds your soul and it damages the people around you. You start to actually want to be clean.
and if you worship a God of pure truth,
You stop cutting corners. You stop lying. You become a person of deep integrity because you instinctively want to reflect the character of your Father in your workplace.
if you worship a God of mercy,
You become softer toward the failures of others. You realize just how massive the debt was that you've been forgiven, so you literally can't hold on to grudges with the same bitter grip you used to.
this naturally leads us directly into the practical application section of the deep dive. The essay beautifully titles this section, Steadying Ordinary Days. I really like that framing. We aren't always living in a massive crisis. Mostly, we are just trying to faithfully get through a regular Tuesday. Let's talk about how these attributes help with specific daily struggles. Let's start with temptation.
We all face it. It's the constant low-level pull to compromise our integrity. And the lie of temptation is always the same. This will finally satisfy you, or this is just a small thing no one will know.
Right, the classic nobody gets hurt rationalization.
Exactly. Knowing God's holiness exposes that lie for what it is. It reminds us that sin always separates and destroys. It reminds us that the fear of the Lord, which isn't cowering in terror but revering him as the ultimate source of all life, is a cleansing fountain. When you see God clearly, sin starts to look much less like a tasty treat and much more like the poison it actually is.
What about shame? I think this is a huge one for the modern listener. So many of us carry around this heavy background noise of, I'm broken, I'm not enough.
Shame always thrives in the dark. It tells us to hide, just like Adam and Eve hiding in the bushes. But God's attribute of mercy invites us directly into the blinding light. 1 John 1, verse 9 says, "If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us." Note those specific words. He is faithful to forgive. He fully expects you to be broken, and he has already made the bloody provision for it on the cross. You don't ever have to hide. You can run to him to get cleaned up, rather than running away from him in fear.
That's incredibly freeing. Now let's tackle anxiety. This is arguably the defining epidemic of our current time.
Anxiety, at its theological core, is basically a crisis of sovereignty. It's the suffocating feeling that I desperately need to control the outcome of my life, but I lack the power to do so. It is an exhausting, soul-crushing way to live.
So how does reading a theology essay actually help someone mid-panic attack?
It helps by fundamentally shifting the weight off your shoulders. 1 Peter 5, verse 7 says, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." Because of his sovereignty and his love, you can actually pray, Lord, you are sovereign. You hold the very molecules of the universe together. You hold my future. I am not the general manager of the universe. I resign my position. I trust you to handle this. It allows you to actually close your eyes and sleep.
And finally, let's talk about decision-making. Guidance. We all desperately want writing on the wall, take the job in Chicago, marry this specific person, buy this house.
And God very rarely writes on the wall for us, but he gives us his character as a compass. Because he is infinitely wise, we look at his word. Does this proposed decision align with the clear commands of Scripture? Because he is sovereign, we can bravely step out in faith, saying what James 4 verse 15 says, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. We don't have to live paralyzed by the fear of making one wrong turn that somehow accidentally ruins our entire destiny. If you are honestly seeking him, he is big enough to steer your ship, even if you grab the wrong rope.
He directs the steps of the godly.
Exactly. It's exactly like a good father teaching a toddler to walk. He's hovering right there. His hands are out. The child might stumble. They might scrape a knee, but the father isn't going to let them fall off a cliff.
Well, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground today. From the polytheism of the ancient Near East to the finished work of the cross, from the staggering metaphysics of eternity to the practical anxiety of a Tuesday morning commute. As we wrap this up, how do we summarize all of this? What is the ultimate takeaway for the listener from this deep dive?
The ultimate takeaway is that the attributes of God are not abstract items categorized on a dusty shelf in a seminary library. They are the most living, active, relevant force in your daily life.
They are the very environment we live and breathe in.
Yes, they are. To know him, to truly, deeply know who he is, leads a human being to three distinct things. First, worship because he is infinitely worthy of our awe. Second, hope because he is unchangingly faithful to his promises. And third, courage because he is powerfully, personally present in our darkest moments. Brother Brome ends his essay with a profound reminder that God does not change, he does not fail, and he will never leave you. He will keep you entirely to the end. Jude verses 24 and 25 say, he is able to keep you from stumbling and to present you before his glorious presence without fault and with great joy.
With great joy. That is the incredible end game of all this theology.
It really is. I want to close our time today by reading the specific scripture passage that ends the essay. It's from Psalm 145, verses 8 and 9. I'm going to read it very slowly. I want you, the listener, to let these ancient words settle over your mind. Put down the phone, turn down the car volume for just a second, and truly hear this. The Lord is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, and rich in love. The Lord is good to all. He has compassion on all he has made.
Good to all. That explicitly includes you.
It certainly does. So here is a simple blessing for you as you go back into your day. May the deeply rooted knowledge of this gracious and compassionate God be your unshakable anchor today. May you feel the absolute steadiness of his eternal character beneath your feet when the world around you shakes. And may his incredibly rich love fill your heart completely as you walk out in his light. Amen.